I've always been terrible at sports, like genuinely, embarrassingly bad. The kind of bad where gym teachers would look at me with this mix of pity and resignation, like they were already calculating how to explain to their supervisor why someone got injured on their watch. So when I tell you that Luca Moretti picked me first for his team every single time we played basketball in our college rec league, you have to understand how absolutely insane that was. Because Luca wasn't just good at basketball, he was the kind of player who made it look like art, all fluid movements and effortless grace, and he took the game seriously in a way that made you want to try harder just to not disappoint him. The first time it happened, I thought it was a mistake. We were standing in the gym on a Tuesday night, about 20 of us from the dorm, and team captains were being chosen for a pickup game. Luca got picked as captain, obviously, and I was already mentally preparing myself to be chosen last, maybe second to last if I was lucky. I was actually composing a little joke in my head to make it less awkward when I was the only one left standing there. But Luca looked across all of us, his dark eyes scanning the group, and he pointed directly at me. He said my name, Adrian, with this quiet confidence, like it was the most obvious choice in the world. I actually looked behind me to see if there was another Adrian standing there. There wasn't. I jogged over to his side, completely confused, and whispered that he probably wanted to pick someone else first. He just smiled at me, this small, private smile that made my stomach do something weird, and said he picked exactly who he wanted. Then he went on to choose actually good players for the rest of his team, and we won that game, no thanks to me. I think I scored maybe 2 points, both on lucky shots that bounced around the rim before falling in. But every time I touched the ball, Luca would call out encouragement, tell me where to move, position himself so I had easier passing options. He played like I was a valuable part of the team instead of its weakest link. It kept happening. Week after week, whenever we played, Luca would pick me first. Not second, not middle of the pack, but first. His actual friends on the team started giving him grief about it, joking that he was trying to handicap himself for a challenge. Marcus, this guy who played varsity in high school, straight up asked Luca one night why he kept picking the worst player first when he could have his choice of anyone. I was standing right there when he said it, and I wanted to disappear into the gym floor. But Luca just shrugged and said I was good luck. That was it. I was good luck. It became this running joke, except Luca never seemed to be joking when he said it. I started noticing other things about Luca after that. Small things at first, like how he always seemed to know when I walked into the dining hall, glancing up from wherever he was sitting like he had some kind of radar for my presence. How he'd save me a seat at study groups, even though we were in completely different majors and had no reason to study together. He was engineering, all physics and calculus, while I was drowning in English literature papers about symbolism in Victorian novels. But he'd sit there doing problem sets while I annotated poetry, and sometimes I'd look up to find him watching me, with this expression I couldn't quite read. Soft, maybe. Intent. Like he was trying to memorize something. The basketball thing started to feel less like a sports decision and more like something else. Something I was afraid to name because naming it would make it real. And if it was real, and I was wrong about what it meant, I'd have to deal with the heartbreak of that. Because somewhere between the first time he picked me and the 10th time, I'd developed this enormous, terrifying crush on Luca Moretti. It snuck up on me gradually, then all at once. One day, he was just the hot guy who was inexplicably nice to me. And the next day, I was lying awake at 3 in the morning thinking about the way his hand felt when it brushed against mine reaching for the same water fountain. The way he said my name, with a slight emphasis on the second syllable that no one else used. The way his whole face transformed when he smiled. Really smiled. Not the polite version he gave to most people, but the genuine article that crinkled the corners of his eyes. I tried to convince myself it didn't mean anything, that he was just a good guy who felt sorry for me and my complete lack of athletic ability, that the first pick thing was actually about pity, not preference. But then there was the night everything started to shift into something I couldn't explain away. We'd just finished a game, and I'd actually played decently for once. Decently for me, anyway, which meant I hadn't caused us to lose. We were all heading out of the gym, sweaty and exhausted, and Luca caught up with me in the parking lot. He was slightly out of breath, like he'd jogged to reach me, and he asked if I wanted to grab food with him. Just the two of us, he specified, which felt important somehow. Different from the group hangs we sometimes did. We ended up at this 24-hour diner off campus, sliding into a booth that had seen better decades, and for the first time since I'd known him, Luca seemed nervous. He kept fidgeting with his napkin, folding and unfolding it, and he wasn't quite meeting my eyes. I ordered pancakes, even though it was almost midnight, because that felt like the kind of chaotic choice that matched my internal state. And Luca ordered coffee. He didn't drink. He just wrapped his hands around the mug like he needed something to hold on to. Finally, he asked me if I knew why he always picked me first. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant, and I realized I'd never heard Luca sound uncertain about anything before. I made some stupid joke about being his good luck charm, repeating his own words back to him. But he shook his head. He said it wasn't about luck. Then he went quiet for a long moment, staring down at his coffee, and I watched his throat work as he swallowed hard. When he looked up at me, there was something raw in his expression, something vulnerable and scared and hopeful all at once. He told me he picked me first, because those were the only few seconds of the week when he had an excuse to choose me openly, in front of everyone, without having to explain or justify it. When he could say my name and point at me, and have me come stand by his side and no one would question it, because that's just what team captains do. They pick their players. He said for those brief moments, he got to make a public declaration of wanting me on his team, wanting me close, and hide the full truth of it behind the pretense of a game. I couldn't breathe properly. My pancakes sat untouched in front of me, probably getting cold, but I couldn't look away from Luca's face. I asked him what the full truth was, even though I thought I knew, even though I desperately hoped I knew, because I needed to hear him say it out loud. Needed to know I wasn't projecting my own feelings onto innocent gestures and reading meaning into things that weren't there. Luca reached across the table and took my hand. Just took it, right there in the diner booth, his palm warm and slightly rough against mine. He said the full truth was that he'd pick me first for everything if he could. First for his team. First for his time. First for his attention. First person he looked for in a crowded room. First person he wanted to tell when something good or bad happened. First person he thought about in the morning, and the last one on his mind before sleep. He said he'd been trying to work up the courage to tell me for months, but every time he got close, he chickened out. Because what if I didn't feel the same way? What if he ruined our friendship? What if I was uncomfortable and started avoiding him? I was crying. Not like sobbing or anything dramatic, just silent tears sliding down my face while I held his hand across the sticky diner table. I told him I'd been hoping he'd pick me for real, not just for basketball, that I'd been watching him watch me and trying not to read too much into it and failing miserably. That I'd started going to the gym on Tuesday nights, even when I was exhausted from classes, just because I knew he'd be there. That I'd learned the difference between his real smile and his polite smile, and felt absurdly privileged every time I got the real one. He moved around to my side of the booth, sliding in next to me, and he wiped my tears away with his thumb. His touch was so gentle it made me want to cry harder. He asked if he could kiss me, and I nodded because I didn't trust my voice. And then Luca Moretti was kissing me, in a dingy diner booth at midnight on a Tuesday. And it was perfect. It was soft and tentative and sweet, tasting like coffee and hope, and his hand came up to cup my jaw like I was something precious. When we broke apart, he pressed his forehead against mine and laughed, this breathless, relieved sound, and told me he'd been wanting to do that since the first time he picked me for his team. We stayed in that booth for hours, talking about everything, about when we first noticed each other, really noticed, in that way that goes beyond casual acquaintance. For him, it was during a dorm meeting in September, when I'd made some sarcastic comment that made him actually laugh instead of just smile politely. He said he'd gone back to his room and realized he wanted to make me laugh like that, wanted to be the reason I smiled. For me, it was the first basketball game. Watching him play with such focus and passion, and then having him direct that focus at me, patient and encouraging instead of frustrated by my incompetence. He told me about all the times he'd almost said something. The night we studied together, and I fell asleep on my textbook, and he'd just sat there watching me for 20 minutes, working up the nerve to wake me up with a kiss instead of a gentle shake, then losing his courage. The time we went to see a movie with a group and ended up sitting next to each other, and our arms touched on the armrest for the entire 2 hours, and he spent the whole movie hyper-aware of that point of contact, instead of paying attention to the screen. The morning he saw me in the dining hall, looking exhausted and stressed, and he wanted to pull me into a hug and tell me everything would be okay, but settled for buying me coffee instead. I confessed my own almost moments. The night I'd rehearsed a whole speech about my feelings, then saw him laughing with some beautiful guy from his engineering class, and convinced myself I'd misread everything. The time he'd shown up at my dorm room at 2 a.m, stressed about a project. And we'd ended up talking until sunrise. And I'd been so sure he was going to kiss me when he left. But he just squeezed my shoulder and thanked me for listening. All those Tuesday nights when I'd go home and overthink every interaction, every word, every glance, trying to decode whether he felt something too, or if I was just desperately wishful thinking. We left the diner when they started setting up for the breakfast rush, stepping out into the early morning cold. Luca took my hand again as we walked to his car, and this time, it felt different. Not secret or stolen, but intentional. Claimed. He drove me back to campus, and we sat in his car in the parking lot as the sky started to lighten, not wanting the night to end. He kissed me again before I got out. Longer this time. Deeper. His hand threading through my hair. And I felt it in every nerve ending. When we finally broke apart, he promised this wasn't just a one-time thing for him. He wanted to do this right, wanted to take me on actual dates, wanted everyone to know I was his if I wanted to be his. I told him I'd wanted to be his since the first time he picked me first. Maybe even before that. In some unconscious way I hadn't recognized yet. He smiled that real smile, the one I loved, and said he'd been mine for just as long. I just hadn't known it. We made plans to meet for coffee the next day, an actual date this time. Not just a friendly hangout I could pretend meant more than it did. When I finally went inside, I was exhausted and wired all at once, too full of feeling to even think about sleep. That was 6 months ago. We still play basketball on Tuesday nights, and Luca still picks me first every single time. But now everyone knows why. They've stopped teasing him about it because it's obvious what it means, what it's always meant. I'm still terrible at basketball, maybe even worse now, because I spend half the game distracted by the way Luca moves, the way he looks at me when he passes me the ball, the way he finds excuses to touch my shoulder or my back or my hand. But I score more points now, partly because I'm trying harder, partly because Luca has spent hours patiently teaching me, and partly because knowing he believes in me makes me believe in myself a little more. Last week, he told me he loved me for the first time. We were in his dorm room, studying together like we do most evenings now, except I was mostly just watching him work through calculus problems because I found the little furrow between his eyebrows when he concentrated unreasonably attractive. He looked up and caught me staring, and instead of being embarrassed, I just smiled at him. He set down his pencil and said it. Simple and direct, like it was just a fact he was stating. I love you, Adrian. Not, I think I'm falling for you or I really like you, but I love you. Present tense. Definitive. I said it back immediately because I'd been feeling it for weeks, but waiting for the right moment. And apparently, the right moment was a random Tuesday evening surrounded by textbooks and empty coffee cups. He pulled me into his lap and kissed me until we were both breathless, and his calculus homework ended up on the floor. Forgotten. Later, wrapped up in his arms on his narrow dorm bed, I asked him if he'd ever regretted picking me first that initial time, taking a chance on the worst player, just because he wanted me close. He said it was the best first pick he'd ever made, and he'd make it again every time, in every universe, in every version of our story. I used to think being picked first was about being the best, the most talented, the obvious choice. But Luca taught me it's about being chosen intentionally, specifically, because someone sees value in you that has nothing to do with skill or ability. It's about someone deciding you're worth it, worth the risk, worth the effort, worth choosing openly and repeatedly. He picked me first for his team when I wasn't the best choice strategically, but I was the right choice for him, the only choice that mattered. And in doing so, he taught me that sometimes love looks like someone choosing you first. Every time, even when it doesn't make sense to anyone else. Especially then. Because that's when it means the most.